Welcome to AP Taylor Swift, the podcast for Swifties with English degrees, or those who just overanalyze everything. Each episode, we dive into a deep reading of Taylor Swift's lyrics to uncover the literary themes, references, and inspirations behind the songs to better understand and interpret why Taylor's songs resonate so deeply with fans. I'm Jodi, and I'm joined by Jenn and Maansi, and we are your unofficial professors of Taylor Swift. We did all the extra credit, then got graded on a curve. So now we're here to teach some lessons, whether we're qualified to or not.
For today's show and tell episode, we are going to be digging into the theme of Alice in Wonderland themed songs. Super excited about this. I think we have some hot takes in here, which I think will be really fun to dive into. But to kick things off, just some additional context about Alice in Wonderland and just the cultural impact of this story and why this is something that seems to be capturing a lot of people's imaginations for the last however many years, 200 years or something like that. So Alice in Wonderland, the actual original story is Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, which was published by Lewis Carroll in 1865, followed by the sequel Through the Looking Glass, which was published in 1871. Something I did not know until I was researching this is that Lewis Carroll was a pen name. His real name was Charles Lutwidge Dodgson. That was a hard word for me to say. So technically this is the literary nonsense genre, which is really interesting that that's an entire genre, and I think that that is a fun genre. Some just kind of scholarly opinions about this that I thought were interesting and relevant. F.J. Harvey Darton was a scholar who argued that Alice's Adventures in Wonderland made a massive impact on children's literature because it moved children's literature away from didacticism towards literature that would delight or entertain, which I think if you actually read this book itself, you can kind of see some of that coming in. So I thought that that was interesting, moving away from this. It's all about teaching, it's all about creating morals, and it's more like let's have fun, which I thought was an interesting argument. Some other people, I couldn't find specific names for this one, but I still thought it was an interesting point, was that some people think that one of the points of Alice in Wonderland is critiquing the way that childhood was handled in these more privileged Victorian homes where a lot was demanded of children so young, and that the story is criticizing that and saying children should have more fun, that they should be a little bit more free, which I think there's a lot we could dive into there. And then one other thing I thought was interesting before I went, if anyone else has things that they learned, there's a scholar, Daniel Bivona, who argued, and I thought this was a really interesting hot take, that Wonderland itself is actually very rule-bound. Its rules are just not like our world. So it's not a place of no rules. It's just rules that we don't understand. And more specifically, Alice doesn't understand. So she's navigating a world that has rules that make no sense to her, which I thought was very interesting for a lot of reasons. So that is Alice in Wonderland. Do you guys have anything you want to add for that context before we dive into showing and telling our songs?
Yeah. Thanks so much for that intro, Jen. I think one thing that's also interesting is that Alice in Wonderland as a story has existed in a lot of different mediums over the years. There's, of course, the original story that came out in the 1800s, but it was also adapted as a Disney film. I think that's the version that most of us are familiar with. Another thing to call out is that the live action Johnny Depp, Helena Bonham Carter version of it came out in 2010, and I feel like that's a little relevant because a lot of us, including Taylor, were very much like in teenage years at that time, and I think in the context of even when she was writing, it was culturally relevant because it was coming out at that point.
I rewatched the live action as preparation for this, and I could do a whole podcast of just talking about my feelings with that because that was a whole thing. Yeah, it was a whole thing. There's another thing I saw too, that there is an Alice in Wonderland ballet, which I was I desperately want to see that now. That has to be stunning.
You know what? I actually think I knew that because I actually think I might have done some dances from that as a child. Actually, I think I was in one of those. Like, we did, like, snippets of that. Now that I'm remembering, I've got to dive into my own archives. Wow, that unlocked a memory. Okay. I reread the book. So this is my book, Alice is from high school, from my actual AP English class. And so I've got lots of fun little notes from when I was like, 17, 16, and then added some more. I'll go into a lot of what I thought when I get to my song. But to me, the two things that resonated with me before even diving into my rereading, I was like, oh, I remember this thinking about this as a child's book, because obviously it was written for children, but it actually being pretty dark. And maybe some of that darkness is coming from, now that Maansi, you mentioned the film with Helena Bonham Carter. And oh my God, why am I blanking? I love that I came up with Helena Bonham Carter before Johnny Depp. Anyway, order of importance. That might be where a lot of that darkness comes from. So that's one thing that colored my interpretations of how Taylor comes up with Alice in Wonderland themes. And the other big thing is this transition from childhood to adulthood, navigating the world that's absurd and violates what you know as the rules of the world. I think that really resonated with me, and just this idea that he's writing how a child sees the adult world, and so like writing through the eyes of the child, and that is why things are mad and wild, because as adults we now realize that we don't actually know what we're doing. So I'll leave it at that until we get back to my songs.
All right, do we want to dig in? I believe the first is Wonderland. Real hot take.
Yeah, so I chose the song Wonderland, kind of an obvious choice, but felt like we couldn't skip the obvious. It's really interesting. We got a chance to peek at each other's songs that we were bringing to show and tell, and we all picked kind of different degrees of separation from the theme. Mine is the most on the nose, if you will, the most obvious. But I think I'm really excited about this discussion because I think it's going to be interesting to go from something that is so obviously about this story to something that maybe is a little bit more tangentially related. But Wonderland was on 1989, came out in 2014, and so me bringing up the movie was partially because it's in that same sphere of time. It was recently, there was a version of Alice in Wonderland that had just recently re-entered pop culture, and it was, as Jodi mentioned, kind of this dark, magical, kind of whimsical movie, but dark in like a kind of eerie way. And that was kind of probably what a lot of people had in mind. I don't want to say that that's what Taylor had in mind, but it was just kind of what was relevant at that moment. What's interesting about this song is that it is not actually in the main set of songs that Taylor put in for 1989. It was a track 14. It was in the deluxe edition specifically.
Does that mean it wasn't, like, was that one of those that was only available at Target?
So it's interesting because I was trying to see just what normal 1989 edition looked like, but I was only able to find
I have it
the
somewhere.
deluxe edition. Actually, yeah, that's right. So on Spotify, I just pulled this up. So normal 1989 cut off with clean, track 13.
It's a great ending song.
The deluxe edition had Wonderland as the first one of the additional songs. So that is interesting because to me, this song really stands out in my mind as I remember it being extremely catchy. It was a fun song. I've always loved this song. And it's just interesting to think that it wasn't one of the main ones. Typically, her most popular songs tend to be in the main tracks, although every now and then there's exceptions. And I think this was definitely one of those. It became a part of 1989 so easily. Some interesting things about the lyrics. So I said it was really obvious, Wonderland. It's called Wonderland. The lyrics have many really obvious allusions right from the beginning. She falls down a rabbit hole, says that nothing is as it seems. There's references to Wonderland many, many times directly. There's a reference to Cheshire Cat, Smile. She talks about how everybody loses their mind. And so it's very obvious that Wonderland is a theme throughout this entire song. I think what's interesting is that Wonderland is described as being both kind of an amazing place, but also an awful place. She uses a lot of, is antithesis the right word? But I'm not sure, or maybe it's juxtaposition, but I think it's where it's like the opposite of the exact opposite of the words. There's a rhetorical device where you're like saying one word and then you reflect the exact opposite of the word. And she she talks about you and I got lost in it right after she says we found Wonderland. So there's like found and
I
then
see.
lost. And
The
then
dichotomy between the two.
I think it's important because the key is to communicate like maybe the range or the contradictory feelings. And she's definitely talking here about some very conflicting emotions. And she uses a ton of these words throughout, like lost and found, pretended it could last forever, but then they had to leave. It was never worse. It was never better. I mean, there's a lot of contradictory language in here that makes it feel like it was tumultuous time or a like confusing time. It creates a sense of chaos in my opinion, but adds that, I don't know, adds that kind of complexity maybe that she's trying to capture an emotion that's bigger than words.
And it reflects the book really nicely in that regard, because I
It
think the book
does.
has a lot of, like, she gets bigger, she gets smaller, it's a lot of opposites, and that is part of the confusion that Alice is feeling in Wonderland.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting because some of the questions that I had as I was looking over this song, which maybe we can explore more in your songs as well, is what is Taylor's relationship with Wonderland and who does she see herself as? Because I
Yes.
think it would be fascinating if it's consistent. It would be fascinating if it changes. In this particular song, she describes Wonderland as this place of chaos that was both terrifying but also wonderful. It makes you feel like it was some of the best time of her life, but also a time where she really did not know what was going on or was not in control.
And isn't that just a metaphor for growing up? Like, isn't that what like teenage years are? You think you have this autonomy and you think that like, oh, I'm going to be an adult and I'm going to have this freedom and know what's going on and I'll understand things. And then you get to that adulthood and you're like, oh shit.
Yes, definitely. And there are some lyrics that specifically allude to that too. But it's just the original story was about this coming of age kind of story. It's the pressure that kids are put on. And I do think that in this story, there's a line, didn't they tell us don't rush into things? To me feels like a maybe growing up too fast kind of thing. Everyone says to take it easy. There is also a line towards the end where she says that we were being watched. All alone, or so it seemed, but there were strangers watching, and whispers turned to talking, and talking turned to screams. This idea that all along there were strangers watching, definitely she grew up in the public eye. She had a lot of scrutiny. There was paparazzi everywhere. Certain relationships were a lot more high profile than others. It definitely hints that this song overall is more about being forced to grow up too fast in the public eye in a both thrilling but terrifying kind of experience was my takeaway. But yeah, like going back to that question of what was her relationship with Wonderland, it's not totally negative. It definitely feels like we found this, but there were some issues. And so in this particular instance, I think she has kind of like a fond memory of Wonderland, and she has kind of positive associations with Wonderland, and I'm curious as to if that stays consistent or if that changes throughout her various references.
So I have in our Slack instance, I just, and all, since we came up with this topic, have just been like slacking myself my random musings. And one that I have in here that I think is relevant to what you're asking, Maansi, about what's the connection to Wonderland. It's a book that is about grappling with the transition from childhood to adulthood, trying to navigate a world that's totally absurd to you and that violates what you know as the rules of the world. And it makes sense that Taylor then might identify with this book because she had to become an adult, working, making money, and all the trappings of responsibilities of adulthood at a very young age when she really was still a child. She started songwriting at 13, and there's a lot of youth and references to her childhood in her music, but she was doing that in an adult world where she was making money and having a job. And I think that 1989 is also her transition to pop. It's her transition to a very different world musically, business wise. And I think that that probably also came with a lot of changes to how she is seen or how she is approaching the business, the music business and the music industry. Again, I don't want to go down too much into her experience because we're not there, we're not her. But I think what makes this song and the Wonderland references really relevant and relatable is this idea of this transition from childhood to adulthood, and how you thought that being an adult would be really fun because you'd have all this freedom, and you get there and you realize, oh shit, like nobody actually knows what they're doing. This is wild. And maybe childhood was more fun because I was carefree.
Yeah, I agree. 1989 era was the era where she goes from Nashville to New York. It was all of her friends, her girl gang. It was a time where she was very much in the public eye. She had this new image, she had this new group of friends, she had all these high profile relationships, but there was just a ton of paparazzi on her all the time. And when we think about just her age, she was not that much older than like shortly out of teenage years. So she was still really, really young and having to grapple with all of that. So I definitely think that that played into this song very specifically.
All right. I love it. I feel like we could talk about that forever. But for the sake of time, do we want to move on to our next show and tell?
Yes. Okay, that's me. Before I dive into my song, I'm going to give you my whole preamble that got me to choosing the song. So I've already talked about it, that like Alice in Wonderland on the surface is this whimsical children's book about adventure and creativity and joy, but it's actually dark and it has a lot of deeper meaning. It's not as carefree and as it looks or as it appears. So layer by layer, you recognize the perversion and the complexity, and in some instances, the darkness of the characters in the story. So I decided that Lover is Taylor's Alice in Wonderland album. On the surface, and I can contradict myself 1,000 times, but here's how I got here. On the surface, Lover is rainbows and butterflies and lightness and joy. Like that is the marketing, that is the branding. I'm in my Lover outfit today, and some pinks and blues. That is what she wants you to see when you associate with this album. But when you actually get into the songs on this album, there's a lot of darkness. There's a lot of anxiety and complexity in these songs. And you can experience Lover on the surface for the joy and the rainbows and the butterflies that she's emerged from her Reputation era. Or you can look deeper and realize that being in love comes with a lot of anxiety, the anxiety of fearing it'll end, worrying that you're going to mess it up. So when you look at Lover, again, like the perception is that it's light and it's fun and it's about being in love, but The Archer, I Forgot That You Existed, Cornelia Street, The Man, Soon You'll Get Better, Miss Americana and the Heartbreak Prince, and Death by a Thousand Cuts are all kind of anxiety and dark. Anyway.
The Archer and the Eras tour was significantly more emotional than I was prepared for.
Yes.
I was like, that hit me hard.
So I centered on Lover as, okay, Alice in Wonderland. Then I read a little deeper, and as I mentioned, this Alice in Wonderland is about childhood and the growth from childhood to adulthood. And the song that does that for me is It's Nice to Have a Friend. And I will get there. You will see it, I promise. Or maybe you'll think I'm wild. I'm mad. So 2019, this is track 17 of 18 songs, which is wild, written by the one and only Taylor Swift. So It's Nice to Have a Friend, I'm going to be the first to admit, is usually a skip for me. It is just not the vibe that I want when I'm rocking out to Taylor Swift, because it is simple, it is short, it's a poem, but it is straightforward and childlike, and it tells the story of growing up, but with the perspective and cadence and tone of childhood, which really reminded me a lot of how Alice in Wonderland has Alice grappling with the complexities of adulthood, but from this childlike perspective. So on the surface, It's Nice to Have a Friend is very, very simple. But when you read deeper, the imagery is what suggests the story versus actually telling the story, right? You never know that she's a child. What do you get that tells you that she's a child in the first stanza? School bell rings, sidewalk chalk, I lost my gloves, want to hang out, right? You get the imagery of childhood, but never the actual language of I am a child. And same as it goes on, how do we know in the second verse that they've grown up? No curfew, right? That's the only thing that really tells you at first that like they have grown. That's also a lot in here that tells me that it's the child's perspective of adulthood and growing up. Like the idea that no curfew is what you think of when you think of being older. Or, for example, rice on the ground is what signifies a wedding. Church bells, right? Those are the only things that tell you what this is. Or my favorite part is stay in bed the whole weekend, right? Like when you're a kid and you think of adulthood, you think, oh, I don't have to do anything. I'm just going to stay in bed. Or maybe that's what I think of as adulthood now, that I get to stay in bed all weekend. But I think the other idea that made this connection to Wonderland is the idea that it is a poem, and there are a lot of poems in Alice in Wonderland. It's often where a lot of the allegories come out, a lot of the meaning of the story comes out through the poems, and it's also where Alice is that's where she's really grappling or realizes, like, I don't know who I am anymore, or wait, do I have this right? There's a lot of times in the story where she's saying, I have to get to the actual, I think it's when she's with the caterpillar and she's like, I've lost my words and I have it all backwards. And he's like, well, tell me the poem. And she reads it and he's like, oh, that's not quite right. That's not right. So it's through poems that she's realizing that she doesn't know as much as she thought she did. So I think this is much more thematically and literarily, is that a word? Linked to Wonderland than more direct. Like there's no, initially I was going to do long story short because it's literally fell down the rabbit hole. But what I loved that to me, this song linked to the themes of Alice in Wonderland much more directly, and then was much more loosely tied in other ways. So, Lost My Gloves, the White Rabbit in the beginning of Alice in Wonderland is looking for the Queen's glove. Where can I have dropped them, I wonder, he says. So, little things like that. There's trumpets before the third verse in the music, which reminded me of in the book before the Queen of Hearts shows up. The trumpets are sounding. There's a lot about the passage of time in Alice in Wonderland, about Alice literally growing and shrinking with the passage of time or the elusiveness of time. And this whole song takes place over the course of a life, starting as a child, going into teenage years, and then becoming an adult and getting married. So there's a lot more that I could go into, but I know this was a bit of a wild card, but when I heard it, and the way I came up with the song for this one is I was literally just listening to the This Is Taylor Swift playlist on Spotify. And this came up. And I think initially I was like, oh, no. And then I was like, wait a second. I went back and listened. I was like, this is it.
I love the fact that you mentioned the music, the trumpets, because one of the things about Wonderland is that it is supposed to be both like wonderful and amazing, but also kind of creepy. Like there is some sort of dissonance there where it's like both amazing and kind of weird. And this, you mentioned that this is kind of a skip song for you, and it has been for me too. And part of it is, at face value, the lyrics seem really sweet, like really lovely and innocuous, but the music has something kind of eerie to it. Like,
very eerie. The children's choir, it's weird.
Trumpets, like, it's bizarre, right? And that is weird. Like, why does she do that?
One of the things that this part was making me think about too is like, yeah, it's weird. But it does. You heard this song, not knowing the album, not knowing the artist, you'd be like, is this like a nursery rhyme? Like, is this like just? But it's kind of weird take on it, an adult take, kind of a creepy take. And immediately, as you guys were talking about that, I was thinking of at the tea party, they sing "Twinkle Twinkle Little Bats." That's the song, and they take this like loved nursery rhyme and they make it just a little weird. Also, bats come up a lot. She has this whole like thought about bats as she's falling.
The two other things I want to mention about this, because this is AP Taylor Swift, and so it'd be remiss to not mention the things that I think my AP English teacher would call out. This song initially reminded me a lot of William Carlos Williams' poem, The Red Wheelbarrow. I don't know if you all know it, but love it. It's classic AP English. And I looked deeper into that and to try and figure out why. And it was the idea, enjambment. In poetry, enjambment is incomplete syntax at the end of a line the meaning, quote unquote, runs over or steps over from one poetic line to the next without punctuation. So the phrase, something gave you the nerve, and then the next line is to touch my hand. That's one sentence that runs over from one line into the next. So I loved that. I loved that it literally brought me back to something I first learned about in my AP English class.
Well, and there is a whole genre of poetry where there's something really eerie about the poem. I mean, a lot of Poe and Dickinson is like this kind of macabre, dark kind of poetry that's both beautiful but dark. And I do definitely feel like she has managed to do that with music,
Yes.
because the lyrics here are so harmless. They're very sweet, but she adds music to make it feel weird and creepy and dark. And bringing those two sides together, it's almost like a misstep. You think you're going down the stairs and then you skip a step and you're like caught off a little, and it makes you uneasy.
Speaking of skipping a step, the second thing I was going to bring up was that the poem is in iambic trimeter. So it's the pattern of unstressed and stressed syllables in the pattern which goes unstressed, stressed, unstressed. So school bell rings, walk me home, sidewalk chalk covered in snow, which almost like gives you the feeling of like, I don't know, tripping a bit or skipping.
It does.
Almost like skipping, like that
Mhm.
lightness, or I mean, skipping and tripping. That reminds me of in Gold Rush. Falling feels like flying till the bone crush,
Yes.
where skipping is free and light until you realize you're tripping and falling.
I also think lyrically that it's nice to have a friend while you're telling this. There's a wedding, like I love my husband dearly. Yes, he is like one of my closest friends, but to continue to have this narrative of like it's nice to have a friend while you're telling this like love story is kind of interesting to me. It's almost like my best friend who I love with my whole heart says I don't mind too much. Like all the time, I'm like, hey, do you want to hang out? And he'll like, oh, like I wouldn't mind it. I'm like, no, you need to tell me, do you want to hang out or do you not want to hang out? Like this is not an I wouldn't mind it situation. Language is a thing we're working on, but it gives me that same vibe of like it's nice to have a friend. Okay, if I said that to my husband, like our 10-year anniversary is in a few months, and I was like, hey, it's nice to have a friend when you're around, he'd be like, okay, we are more than. Do you know that we're more than that? Like, is it more than just nice to have? Like, it just kind of feels like this. Like, it feels disjointed to me. Of, like what I'm saying versus like what's actually happening. Like, we have so many big grand love songs. I don't know. Like, do you actually want to be with this person, or is it just like loneliness and it's nice to have a companion?
I actually take the other approach where I think it's really saying, don't forget that this person who's, your romantic partner is also a friend, is someone who should be there with you in the small moments. Like I feel like this whole song is about the really small, tiny details. It's not about like the details that you get at the wedding are the church bells and you're carrying me and there's rice on the ground. That's it. Those are small moments, the small moments of like this pink sky on the roof, you touch my hand, video games, pass me a note, like having a companion in the everyday that I think often in her songs and in our ideas of romance and love, it's about the big sweeping gestures. It's about the enchanted ball gown and ballroom meeting, or throwing rocks at your window. But really it's about the small everyday that's going to fill up much more of your day, of your life, than, the big fancy grand romantic gestures. But that's saying from someone who is not married.
Maybe I'm just demanding in how people tell me that they love me. That's fine. And I accept that that's probably true about me.
Are we convinced that the friend is the person she's married,
Yes.
or is the friend like a consistent person that she's had throughout her life, through all those phases?
I think it's the same person. And the reason for that is you have the third line, sidewalk chalk covered in snow. And then that repeats, rice on the ground looks like snow. So I think that it's the same person in the beginning and the end, and that is what tells us that it's.
But could it be like I was the maid of honor at my childhood best friend's wedding, and I have memories of being kids with her, playing video games and playing, and then also being at her wedding and blowing
do you call her
bubbles
babe?
and celebrate. I mean, I probably have, honestly. I'm not gonna lie to you.
Did you carry her home from the wedding?
I mean, part of me, I guess, like, even whenever I've heard this song, like, I never saw it as a romantic song. Maybe it's just that eerie music, but I was wondering if maybe the verses are talking about whatever different people, but then the it's nice to have a friend is just like, it doesn't say it's nice that you're my friend. Like, couldn't the friend be anyone? Like, some consistent friend through all of the life's phases. Maybe it's like a little bit of a stretch here, but it's just so interesting how the lyrics play with the music. It could be a love song at its core, but it's also like, I mean, going back to Alice in Wonderland, like, the characters in Wonderland are these imaginary creatures, supposedly, who kind of get Alice through various things. And I just wonder if it's like, I don't know, imagination, but something that's like consistent, that's always been there for her life through all of life's phases, and maybe not like necessarily the person that she loves.
I think that, to me, again, this goes back to the idea of when we're children, we think of a romantic partner from a romantic perspective only. And then as an adult, you realize, wait a second, I need this person to be my friend. If this is the person I'm going to live my life with, this needs to be the person that's going to hold my hand and just sit in bed with me, but also who's going to call my bluff, but will still love me. So I think it's, again, going back to Alice in Wonderland, this idea that the child's perspective of adulthood and how that kind of gets flipped on its head when you become an adult and you realize, like, oh, wait a second, like, it's not the same that I thought. Being an adult doesn't mean the same things that I thought it would, and maybe we actually had it right when we were children more than we do when we're adults.
Love it.
I know we need to move on to mine, but I have one last thought about this that is going to seem totally out of left field, but I'm going to say it anyways. This whole conversation, too, is like, to me, fundamentally, it's about companionship, where we're deciding if is it a good romance, is it a bad romance, is it friendship, whatever. It is about companionship. It's nice to have a friend. And the thing that really struck me reading Alice in Wonderland, because you don't really see it as much in like the films, is how much she misses her cat.
Aww.
Like, constantly throughout the book, she's like, oh, I wish Dinah was here. Oh, she would enjoy this.
And she doesn't have any friends in Wonderland. She like tries to make friends and she tries to like ask questions and show up, and she's like always saying the wrong thing. That's a really good connection.
She really tries. Like, there's one moment with the Duchess when they're in the Queen's Garden, and she's like, oh, we're having a good conversation, and then it turns immediately, and she's like, okay, well, fine, whatever. I guess I just can't talk to this person. So the whole story, she's just missing her cat, and I feel like it's like a different version of it, but it's still this like universal yearning for a companion, for a friend, and it's not, in this case, like, it's not always a person. And I really connected to that. I had friends growing up, but like, I have always loved my animals so deeply. And like, there are times, I forget where we were recently. We went to like a baseball game or something, and we were like an hour into it, and I just turned to Chris and I was like, I miss our cats. And he's like, I know, honey, we'll be home soon. I was like, okay. So a different type of companionship, but that was like a consistent theme.
That's why Taylor Swift loves Alice in Wonderland, because she too loves her cats. There's literally cats on the book.
Well, I wanted, Jen, maybe you'll get into this, but I do want to also at some point discuss, like, who does Taylor view herself as? Like, we all have these Disney princesses or characters that we all identified with as children. And just knowing that Disney version of the Alice in Wonderland has been out like our whole lives. Taylor is this blonde-haired, blue-eyed girl who loves cats, and I hear was kind of an outcast in school, didn't have a ton of friends, maybe felt alone a lot of times. So I just wonder if there was always this identification also with the story.
I think that's a great promotion for our next episode, which is a deep dive into Wonderland. But before we get there,
I think it transitions well into my song, which is Anti-Hero, because it's a much more like internal, like kind of psychological Wonderland is my argument, that it's inside your head, the experience. So I chose Antihero, released in 2022 on Midnights. It's track number 3, and it was written by Jack Antonoff and Taylor Swift, which, if I could be a bug on a wall watching them write this song, because it feels very personal to Taylor Swift.
This is a therapy song. I will forever believe this is a therapy song.
So I thought it was really interesting that Jack Antonoff was a co-writer on it, and I think I'm going to make this connection here because I just thought of it and I'm going to say it. I think in some ways Jack Antonoff is the nice to have a friend for Taylor Swift, because he has been one of her most consistent companions.
Wow.
And to write a song this personal, my guess is that this was her saying, these are the things I feel, and he's like, okay, let me help you communicate this as best as possible.
Dr. Antonoff.
Yeah, right. So I chose this song for a couple of reasons. There were 2 really obvious references to me. One, Giant on the Hill. You know, obviously Alice grows big, grows small, and then the whole at tea time, everybody agrees. So those to me were 2 very obvious references. But I also really felt like, as I was thinking about it, like it is truly in her head. It's the twisted dark Wonderland. We have the Wonderland, the song, where it's like, it's still confusing, we're navigating it, but this is very isolated in her head, going through all these situations where things are quite what they seem, and they're also not the way reality is. So again, it's this navigating. I really thought that was an interesting point, that Wonderland has rules, it's just not the rules Alice knows. And I would argue mental health, that's the way it's felt, at least for me sometimes, when I'm navigating my own mental health, where I'm like, these rules that seem to exist for navigating my brain make no sense. I know I made them. There's dumb rules. I don't understand them. And a lot for me of navigating and growing has been understanding, like, what is this, like, weird world I've created in my brain, and how can I dismantle it or navigate it better? And I feel like that's true for Wonderland and true for kind of like what's happening here. She's exploring this world that is not true, but it feels true. I think a lot of people connected to the song for that reason. I know a lot of people who were like, oh, this like really hit me. And then the tea time I thought was a really good example of that, because, you know, the Mad Hatter's tea is absolute nonsense. They're not saying things that are real. They're not saying things, they're just, it's like fun. It's a fun scene. And I think there's one of those where it's like, there's some truth in what they're saying, but it's pretty nonsensical. And that feels to me a good example of like, when you think about like, it's obviously a cultural reference like right now, and to say like, oh, what's the tea? It's what's the gossip? What's, you know, and that feels like it's a good metaphor for it, of like, we're all sitting around, you know, metaphorically sitting around this table saying nonsensical things. So when she's saying at tea time, everybody agrees. I would argue, who cares what people are saying at those tea times, because those tea times are not based in reality, they're not based in truth, and they shouldn't be like the basis for how you see yourself either. But a couple of other, well, I'll pause there. I have some like very specific like connections from the book to the song. Like I have like some quotes I can kind of put side by side, but before I do that, because that is me being an English person, and I got real close to being like, should I just write a paper about this? And
yes,
like, no,
actually, yes, you should. So I know when I talked about my song, I said Lover is her Alice in Wonderland album, but then when I continued my own rabbit hole, I was like, well, maybe Alice in Wonderland references are more subtle and pervasive than we think. Midnights as an album has many references. So her whole promotion was It's a Clock. And midnight, the idea of midnight time and the whole concept of time is totally pervasive throughout Alice in Wonderland. Lavender Haze reminds me a lot of The Caterpillar, smoking a hookah. Mastermind is a game of chess. And in it, she talks about a wide smirk, which is the Cheshire Cat. And then I'm not going to dive into what I have for Antihero because I think you're going to dive into it. But I thought that this made a lot of sense as well.
And to add to that, the way Era started off was also a similar clock countdown. I feel like the concert itself, it had very Alice in Wonderland vibes.
And I feel like she's always talking about the passage of time. Like, and I think I had asked the question, Maansi, I was like, is this the first time she's had Alice in Wonderland references? And Wonderland might be the first explicit reference, but Nothing New is where it was on Red. It was a vault track, but it was written during Red. And that was all about like, oh, I'm going to be old news. I'm nothing new anymore. And she was all of 20 years old. So I think it's a much more pervasive theme, whether or not it's explicit.
On the Red Volt track, also the I Bet You Think About Me song that she released afterwards, that entire music
that whole
video.
album. The whole
Oh
video
yeah, the music video is incredible.
is so coded. I just want to know, like, when she read this book and how much of it is conscious and how much of it is unconscious. And I know that's not the point, but it is so, like, in diving deep into this, it's all over the place. It's all over her music and her imagery. And I'm like, how much of this is, like, intentional?
Jenn, going back to your tea time reference, I think it's interesting because she's saying it's me, I'm the problem, it's me at tea time, everybody agrees. And Alice at tea time during the Mad Hatter's tea party was also kind of the outcast, right? Like everyone at the tea time is saying all these nonsensical things, but they all agree with each other and they all seem to understand each other. Like at one point, I think there's a conversation about treacle, and then there's like the birthday situation, the day. Alice is the one who's like, I'm the only one who doesn't know what's going on here. And she's clearly the outcast who's trying to keep up but isn't able to. But everyone else is on the same page. And that imagery really shines through in this song. I totally see that.
Also, it never occurred to me to read it this way, but at tea time, everyone agrees. I always thought it was everyone agrees that, like, I'm the problem, but no, everybody else is agreeing amongst themselves about all their stuff. And I'm over here like, what are you talking? Am I the problem? Like, what are you talking about? Like, Alice is the problem at tea time because she doesn't know the answers. She can't keep up with their riddles, and she just doesn't understand the conversation or all of the things that they're talking about.
Yeah, and okay, so I'm going to get into some of the like text side by side, but also side note on that, talking about like, everyone agrees and she's left out. Going back to I Bet You Think About Me makes me think about the line which is like they're all reading the book that just saved them that I haven't heard of. So again, being left out of that conversation of people who are like older and know what's going on, and she feels juvenile and left out is definitely there. So one thing that I thought was really interesting is, and this is like very specific to the written version of Alice in Wonderland, is how much of a storytelling situation is. There's so many asides. And so, like, you know, she's falling through the sky and she's just talking. And then in parentheses, it goes, and she tried to curtsy as she spoke. Fancy curtsying as you're falling through the air. Do you think you could manage it? Which is very, like, telling a story to kids. Made me think of, like, Dora the Explorer, where they, like, turn to the camera and they're like, can you find this? What do you think about this? Where you're engaging a kid in a story. And she has some of those asides in Antihero. So, she, you know, for example, she'll say, like, tale as old as time. Some of those, like, repeats, which, you know, are kind of that, again, I feel like she's telling a story where she's explaining to someone, you know, this is how it feels to be in my head. Ugh, tale as old as time, where you have those moments where you're connecting with the person you're telling the story to, and you're not being a fully impartial storyteller, which I thought was kind of interesting. And then throughout the book, there's a lot of moments with Alice where she is very confused about, like, is she doing the right thing? Is she doing the wrong thing? Because it's a very confusing place. But a very specific line that I thought was interesting was, she, Alice, generally gave herself very good advice, though she very seldom followed it. And that to me was like, it's me, hi, I'm the problem, it's me. It was just a different way of saying that. And then there's a lot of, a huge theme of the whole story is Alice not knowing who she is. You know, where she says, I know who I was when I got up this morning, but I think I must have changed several times since then, which I feel like through this whole song is kind of that, like,
I wrote down that exact quote.
It's like this whole song is like, who am I? Is this good? Is this bad? Like, am I the problem? Like, trying to figure that out.
The other one is, I'm never sure what I'm going to be from one minute to the other.
Yes.
All over the book.
Yeah, it's a really interesting theme, and I think that, like, goes into so many of Taylor Swift songs, but for this one is definitely like a wrestling with yourself song, and I think that that's a lot of what Alice is doing in those moments. And then this one is, like, maybe a stretch, but it, like, really made sense to me. I've always thought that everyone I ghosted stands there in the room is a really interesting line, because it is blaming yourself, and it's, like, one of those moments where we've all ghosted people. It's not, it's not the worst thing you can do, but it's also like, in that case, it probably, like, she's not completely innocent of action. Like, she did make a decision, and she's like sort of suffering the consequences of it, of feeling haunted by like this decision she made. And I, for some reason, like saw a clear connection to that of when Alice is huge and she starts crying, like, can't like get anything under control, and then she becomes small and is drowning in her tears. That like image to me was really vivid, and it kind of had that everyone I ghosted stand there in the room of like a decision I made a while ago that like I didn't really think would have major consequences is now like haunting me, or it's like really affecting me. Like drowning in your own tears is like a very dark image.
And that might be
But
why I
it's
thought
so
this book was
appropriate.
so dark. Because again, like, oh, she's in a pool of tears. How silly. No, like, that is deep. That is dark.
And when she's in a pool of tears, she's berating herself. She is like, oh, you shouldn't have cried so much. Like, she's very harsh on herself as a character. Very, like, she's like berating herself, even though her parents are not there, her nanny is not there. She is the one that's hard on
She's
herself.
acting as an adult. I feel like she talks to herself as an adult. She's by herself and she's trying to reason like an adult, or like she thinks an adult should reason to get her through this, right? I think this is, and she's then faced with a world that is averse to reason. And that's what makes it so hard for her to get through it, because she's like, wait, I am doing everything that I've been taught in school. I'm doing everything that my parents have taught me. I am approaching this exactly the way I have seen adults model reason and logic and finding my way home. And none of that is working. What the hell? And wow, what a metaphor for actually being an adult.
Yeah, and I feel like it's really, you get this with this, I think, anti-hero too, where it's like, it's not that Taylor Swift has never done anything wrong in her life. And it's not, but it's not like these are the result of intentionally malicious behavior either. It's this like really sobering reality of being a human where like sometimes you do something and later on you're like, wow, that actually really hurt me. That affected me poorly. I didn't make a bad decision. I just made a decision, but now I'm going to be haunted by it, or it's going to like truly affect my life. And you get that, I cried because I was sad and now I'm drowning my own tears. I maybe didn't respond to some people because I didn't have time because I'm a multi-millionaire, billionaire, performing artist. But now when I'm alone, that really haunts me. And I feel really bad about that. And I think that it's like that world where it's like, you didn't do anything wrong, but you're still going to experience the consequences of decisions you made.
Which is what an anti-hero is, right? An anti-hero is somebody that maybe does the right things, but maybe not for the right reason, or does the wrong things, but not for the wrong reason.
I remember the first time that I ever heard anti-hero. I remember exactly where I was. I was driving home from school at night in the car, and I just remember like hearing it and breaking down, crying almost like uncontrollably, because I just think that the repetition of like, it's me, I'm the problem, resonated with a lot of people. But I also think it's partially a commentary on how she is her worst critic. Like, she is making it worse for herself because she's the one that's over analyzing what other people think and whether she's making the right step or not, or every single thing that she's doing. At least for me, that is kind of the part that really resonated. It's like, even when things are not that bad, like, you make it worse than they are in your head, and that's why you're the anti-hero. Like, you don't root for yourself. And I think in Alice in Wonderland, like, to that earlier point of, she's the one crying, but she's the one chiding herself for crying. She's like, oh, you shouldn't have done that. You're so silly. Like, why did you do this? How did you get in this mess? You shouldn't have gotten so big. You shouldn't have gotten so small. Like, she is the one that's like constantly berating herself. And in that, she is the problem because nobody else is there telling her these things. It's all coming from herself.
That reminds me a lot of Gloria's monologue in the Barbie movie about being a woman, and like, you're never perfect. Anything you do is inevitably going to be wrong, because that is just what it means to be a woman in these.
And maybe like the fact that a lot of it comes from your own internal
our own internalization of what it means to be. Yeah.
So are all of these conversations going to be therapy sessions, or
Yes.
are we going to
Yes.
have like
But
a
isn't
light
that-
one?
Isn't that what a Taylor Swift, like, to me, Taylor Swift's writing, and that's like why, what inspired us to do this podcast is like her songs resonate on these deeper levels. And it's not because of who she wrote them about or what it means for her. It's about what it triggers in us. It's about, Maansi, you listened to that song and cried because you were like, oh shit, that says something to me very personally. Like, that is what makes these songs resonate. That's what makes these books resonate. That's why we're reading this. When did you say this was written? 100 years ago?
Like 1890.
Yeah, so
60,
a
70,
shit long time ago. It's the same thing, right? Like, we can interpret her songs similar to the way we can interpret Alice in Wonderland, and that's why we're here. I think that's our promo for the whole podcast, guys.
I love it.
On the next AP Taylor Swift, we're going to dive even deeper into Wonderland, the song that is. But that is all we have for you today on AP Taylor Swift. Be sure to rate and review us on your favorite podcast app. Follow us across socials at AP Taylor Swift to stay up to date. And join us next time as we overanalyze the next Taylor Swift song right here on AP Taylor Swift.